Okay, so once again, welcome to the June 2023 discussion about family stories. Yeah, this is a series of ongoing monthly webinars slash discussions, and it's really meant to help you stay unstuck. I apologize, by the way, there's a skip being parked outside, so if there's a bit of background noise, it'll be because of that. These discussions are meant to help you stay unstuck and beat writer's block. What are the ways to, I think one of the best ways to explore your own story and all of the facets it contains is to listen to someone else talk about an angle of their story, because it's impossible to listen to someone's story and not have ideas and stories of your own float up to the surface. So the structure of the call essentially is I'll be introducing the topic. I'll share a story from my own past, which should be about 20 minutes, unless I ramble, which will be about 30 minutes, and then that'll leave us 30 to 40 minutes open discussion if anyone is willing to share ideas that have come up for them. I am recording the first part of the session, but I won't be recording the discussion. That is private for anyone who is here and live. So who is today's session for? Are you on the right webinar? I think you're on the right webinar if you, in some respects, are an expert. You're not just setting out a business. You have years of experience. You're very good at what you do. You get great feedback from the people that you work with. You're also in business for more than just money. Purpose matters to you. Doing what you do on some deep level matters. And whether that's because you're helping a specific group of people, or because you're solving a problem that you struggle with for quite a long time, it could be a wide range of things. But it's not just about the money. It's not just about building a business up to ultimately sell it on. I mean, that could be one of your objectives, but it's not why you go to work every day. In some sense, you're also a pioneer. And what I mean by that is that you have a unique perspective, system, process, transformation, or outcome. So, in some respects, you're doing things differently. Hi, Luke, by the way. Just for anyone new, a quick slide about me. So, I am Rob Drummond. I am first and foremost, as it relates to today's discussion about family stories, I'm a father of two, a 5-year-old called Hugo and a 3-year-old called Ruma. Husband of one. And that really underpins a lot of what I'm doing. I think family stories are a great thread of depth for potentially exploring. I'm also many things. If we have to put labels on ourselves, I could be labeled as a barefoot runner, which is something I do at the moment. Although I have to say the parks in Sheffield are not looking this green at the moment. We haven't had rain for a very long time. In recent years, I've been asking questions about, well, what is going on? So, I'll probably call myself a truth seeker in terms of, I think at the moment there is a lot of fear being pushed at us, but I think we're also at a point in history where I think, I think there's an opportunity to build a world that works for everyone, a world that is based on collaboration, a world that is based on people acting as their fullest empowered selves. That ultimately is what I want for my kids. I'm also an author. So I'm an author of a book called Simple Story Selling, which looks like this. I'm a copywriter, although I don't think I'm a conventional copywriter. You might find me churning out thousands of words and 27-page sales letters, but I am, if we're talking labels, I am a copywriter. I'm also a multi-channel direct marketing consultant. I've spent spent too much of my own money on all the ad networks, and actually that stands me in quite a good stead, because I can see connections between things and almost act as a generalist to get the strategy right before we decide how to tell your story in specific channels. As I've said, I live in Sheffield in England, which, the reason that I live here, this is not where I grew up, but, it is a city of brewing. I think we do beer as good as anyone here. And we also have green spaces, lots of green spaces. and it is a very beautiful place to be at this time of the year. In my work, I'm really, as I said, I'm in the corner of pioneering business owners, and what we're doing here is we're trying to help you be seen as the expert that you are, without feeling that you have to post on LinkedIn 17 times a day, or without funding the Facebook Christmas party. So we do that through the story mapping process, which is about building authentic connections with the people who are already in your world. This isn't really lead generation. This is nurturing deeper connections with people who have already, in some respects, raised their hand and say, yeah, I might be interested in working with you one day. So let me share a family story. So I'm going to share a story about my granddad. So this is actually, I don't have many real photos. So I keep this one on my desk because it's somehow ended up on my desk for no reason. I think I just salvaged it from home at some point. So this is a family. So this is a photo of my granddad and I on a train in North Wales, on a steam train. And as you can tell, it was taken in the days before digital cameras, and where you could pick and choose the ones where everyone is smiling. But such is the way with these things. And when I think about my granddad, I think my earliest memories of him are of playing rugby. So I spent a lot of time at my granddad's in the summer, growing up, because my parents both worked. So, my sister and I went off to my grandparents. So it always felt like it was summertime at their house. And that's probably, I think, because over the 6 months, over the 6 weeks of school summer holidays, I think we spent actually quite a lot of time at my granddad's. And then when we were there in the morning, we'd go to Thurston Common on the Wirral, which is where we lived, and to go and walk the dogs. And then we'd come back and we'd play rugby. We'd play one-on-one rugby in his lounge on this suspended floor, which, as you can imagine, made a right din as we're bouncing around wrestling. And my granddad's dog used to sit on the windowsill at the end with a tail hanging down perilously into the danger zone. So we used to play rugby, and if someone scored a try, you'd have to stand at the end with your arms above your head to mimic the posts while the other person took a conversion. So we used to play rugby, and that migrated over time to me playing rugby in school. And I made the mistake of showing interest in playing for the school rugby team, and that involves traveling to schools across Northwest England in the middle of winter, playing rugby with people I didn't like very much. But everywhere we played, my granddad would always show up on the side of the pitch with this kind of green anorak that he'd had since about 1972, and this concerned expression on his face. He never said anything, but he was always a very concerned onlooker. He was a great worrier, my granddad. So he used to watch me play rugby. Eventually, I decided to stop playing rugby. But we also used to go and watch actual rugby games. So from the mid-90s, we managed to go and watch a series of largely failing local rugby union teams. And it was on the way to one of these games, sitting in his gold Micra, chewing the mandatory Werther's original, that I mentioned to him that the local football team, Tranmere Rovers, had just made the League Cup final at Wembley, which was a big deal because Tranmere are not a big club. And I might like to go, but I didn't think I would get a ticket. And nothing really much more was said about it. Anyway, we got a bit closer to the League Cup final. The tickets at Tranmere Rovers went on sale, and it was in the paper the next day that there was a huge queue outside the ticket office, and about 20 people had camped overnight in the Tranmere Rovers ticket office to be first in line to make sure that they got tickets for the League Cup final at Wembley. So, of course, who do you think was in that line camping overnight to get tickets for us? My granddad was. So he appeared the next morning holding these tickets, looking very tired, but very pleased with himself. So we went down to Wembley. We watched Tranmere play at Wembley, and he was a great rugby league fan, my granddad, as well. So we'd go to Wembley, and he'd tell me that he watched, Widnes play Wigan here in 1957. And at the time, the roads were so quiet that you could basically cycle down there. He also once cycled. So my grandparents lived near Liverpool. He also once cycled down to Canterbury and back, and then he came back because he was worried because he was worried he was going to be late for work. But we went down to Wembley. This was in 2000. We watched Tranmere lose 2-1 to Leicester City in the League Cup final. A year later, so my granddad was a great Everton fan. He supported Everton. That was his football club. A year later, Tranmere were playing Everton in the FA Cup, and I'm there. It's half time. Tranmere winning 2-0. And as he was the only Everton fan I could think of to call, I called him just to check he knew the score. There's many more things I could say about my granddad, but I'm going to leave it there because obviously with family stories, you have to decide where to start them and where to stop them. And actually, your relationship with someone in your family potentially runs over quite a long time frame. In the story that I've just told you, I've started off with me being very small, playing rugby in my granddad's front room on the suspended floor with the dog in the background. And then we've moved forward to school age where I'm playing rugby at school. And then we're going to watch rugby. And there's this connection from watching rugby to going to watch Tranmere at Wembley. But there's a thread of sport. There's a theme here. It's all about the sport. It's all about the rugby. And that's what runs through it. So a story, I think, can either have, I think often in my community, what I'm trying to get the guys in the community to think about is when you're telling a story, there needs to be a location. And in some respects, there has to be some action quite early on in the story. There has to be movements. I think with family stories, I don't think that necessarily applies so much. I think it is okay to kind of dip in and out of longer periods of time, potentially, as long as there is a clear theme behind the line of events that you're relating. Something I've been reflecting in the run up to this call as well is that I think the question of family is more pressing to some people than others. So I was reading a book by the author A.M. Homes called The Mistress's Daughter. So A.M. Homes was adopted at birth, and then her biological mother got in touch with her when she was about 21. And this sparked off a frantic search through the records of like, who am I? So I think in that situation, your family story becomes, critically important to questions of identity and who you are. For me, I've just never really had that urge to kind of delve back into my family history so much, but other people do. So I think that's worth considering. And the other thing that struck me recently is my kids, they've kind of calmed down a bit on it now, but they went through a phase about 2 weeks ago where they just used to watch the Disney film Coco. So Coco is set in Mexico, and it's based around the story of Miguel. So Miguel is the protagonist of the story. And he comes from a family of shoemakers, but Miguel doesn't like to make shoes. He likes to play music. But his great-great-grandfather was expelled from the family for being a musician and abandoning the family. He went off to play gigs and never came back. So the story is about a family story. It's about Miguel's attempt to escape the family story of shoemaking and find his own path. So obviously for Miguel, his family story is very important. And this is kind of a spectrum. And it's a question for you. It's like if you're listening to all this and all of these ideas start bubbling to the surface, then that's great. That means that family stories are probably a rich vein of storytelling to kind of dig into. If for you maybe listening to this and perhaps not that much is coming to the surface, so it's like, well, that's also fine. There's multiple areas that we can kind of pull on, really. Another thing that people often say to me as well, like when we talk about family stories, is, well, would anyone be interested in it? Like, does anyone want to hear about my granddad? And I think it deserves to be told first and foremost. I think my story of my granddad, because ultimately the point of the story that I told about my granddad was him camping out in the Tranmere Rovers ticket office. But he wasn't a Tranmere fan. He did it for me. He would basically do anything. And foundationally, I think he was a good egg. That's what the story is meant to illustrate. And I think on that basis, it deserves to be told. it's probably not of interest to someone who's just coming across you for the first time. It's probably not of it's probably it's perhaps not the first thing you put in a LinkedIn ad and boost as a LinkedIn ad to some new audience. It's probably not the starting point. But for people who are already connected with you, for people who are already opted in, it allows them to get to know you a little bit better. And it also explains where some of your values come from. So one of my highest values, I think, is doing the things that I say I'm going to do. And there's potentially a wide range of sources from that value, but I think having role models in your family and seeing how they behave and seeing how my granddad did things like that also acts as a model. There's another aspect of the story that I told you actually about when we went down to Wembley, and he was saying that he went down there in 1957 to watch Widnes play, and he also cycled on to Canterbury afterwards. There's ties in that, because that is an adventure. And there have been times in my life where I've maybe got on massive motorbike trips. I haven't done the same level of cycling, but I've done motorbiking trips. I've done independent trips as well. So actually telling that story about him doing that epic trip, because cycling from Liverpool to Canterbury is a huge trip. That's many days on a push bike. So telling that story, that then it's one of those things that gets the storytelling gears turning, because it's like, well, when have you been on a big trip? When have you done something that to most ordinary humans is not sensible or possible? That's the kind of thing that can then come up. So often it's like by telling a family story, you don't actually have to share it. You could just tell it for your own purposes. But in the process of telling it, you're going to uncover other stories. And it might be the other story. It might be the story about the epic trip that you were reminded of by thinking about someone that was inspirational in your family. It might be that story that you choose to tell. So, of all of the story ideas that we come up with, it's not like you immediately have to go and write them and publish them out into the world. Like it's great if you feel like you want to do that. And, I'm fully behind that. But it's also fine if you just use it as a sort of prospecting exercise for things that you might want to share with the world. So have a think about who in your family inspired you. On the flip side, who is absence? Who let you down? I was speaking with a client recently where actually the latter was much more the case. And obviously that creates it creates an emotional wound by that absenteeism. And it creates patterns of behavior that have guided my clients' decision-making until recently, because they just weren't aware that it created this program that in their mind that they weren't aware of. And it's only by exploring their story in terms of actually what it came back to an absentee issue for their dad. So that's another angle. If someone let you down, if someone was absent, again, it's not like we immediately have to go and share it, but you might find that you have quite an emotionally powerful story. Because if you are able to share a story about a parent grandparents or whoever it is, somebody who let you down, that's going to have a lot of resonance with a section of your audience. Because also, let's face it, everyone's family is messed up, mine included. I've discovered that the older that I get. So I mentioned the kind of issue of passing of time, and that you might want to tell a family story that illustrates certain values over a longer time period. I think a story that I shared on last month's webinar where we talked about core selling stories was I talked about the birth of my daughter and the ride that we've had through the neonatal intensive care unit. I could actually tie this into my granddad, because my granddad did meet Ruma briefly, and this was in the COVID-19 lockdown. So we tried really hard to get over there to see them, and eventually we managed to make the planets align. We got over there, and my granddad held Ruma, and she screamed. She absolutely screamed. And that's the one and only time we got to hold her. But there's this kind of cross-generational things. And I think because it's cross-generational, there's patterns that show up over and over. And it's these patterns that show up over and over that connect to your values and help guide your purpose. I was talking at the start of the call, you're on the right webinar if you are to some extent purpose-driven. You're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to change the world in some small way that you know how to input on. I'm going to leave my section of the discussion there in a moment. Before we get on to the kind of open discussion, I'd like to just talk through the next steps. So the point of these calls, and the reason that I'm doing them every month, is to help bubble up story ideas. What I'm hoping from you listening to the call so far, and I'm hoping that this has been a good use of your time, even if you just listen to the call to this point, I'm hoping that you've got a notepad handy. I'm hoping that me talking about some of the things that I've shared has caused you to think about your childhood and your family and brought some of those ideas up to the surface. Obviously, so for most of the business owners that I work with, it's one thing having the ideas, it's another thing converting it into the output. So a service that I'm in the process of launching is what I call my Story Jumpstart program. So the way the Story Jumpstart program works is it's basically a kind of 60 to 90 minute call with me, where we talk about the ideas that you've come up with, perhaps on today's call. We talk about, we'll talk about your story in the past. It's much easier to do it in dialogue. Much easier to do it in dialogue. I can verify that every time I've tried to tell my own story, I do the research part by myself, and it's harder. It's actually easier to speak to someone and have them interview you and ask probing questions and listen attentively. And that's what I do in the Story Jumpstart call. So it's a conversation. I then get that conversation transcribed, and we'll pull out different threads, different story ideas. So this is the output that a client has graciously allowed me to share with you. To share with you. So we spoke on the phone for about an hour. We pulled out 12 possible story ideas, and this is all things that she told me. And it's not necessarily that she's going to use these things straight away. It's just a prospecting process to get all of this lined up. What I then did was, based on the conversation that we had, I segmented the relevant parts of the transcript. I've actually tidied up the transcript as well, so that when she comes to write an email or write a social post or even tell a story verbally as part of a presentation, the transcript here is actually much more ready to go than the raw transcript. The main thing we do then is we ask, well, what is the bridge concept? For anyone who's done any more of my training, I refer to this as the one idea in my training courses. So the bridge concept, or one idea, is the point at which you connect from the story that you told to the message that you're trying to communicate. So my client here did tell me some family stories. She told me some stories about her grandparents and about how frugal they were. And we came up with a few bridge concepts that might tie into the message that she's trying to get across. It could be frugality, it could be generosity, it could be care. That was something else she talked about with her grandparents. It could be care. Obviously, that becomes a bridge concept to the care that you show for your clients, potentially, if that's, if you're in a service-based business. So my Story Jumpstart client from that is taking that, and she's currently doing a stellar job of converting these stories into LinkedIn posts. And I keep seeing posts from her that are eerily familiar based on the conversations that we're having. But other clients prefer to go and spend a bit more time on it. And so something that I'm doing with the Story Jumpstart calls is I'm including 5 months of access to my Writer Circle community. So in the Writer Circle community, you get access to paid courses. If you're a free email subscriber, you'll get some of these in the members area anyway. So you get the PDF podcast notes and the template pack and things like that. But you'll also see my Nurture Email Mastery program, which is my 5-week look over my shoulder, take a story idea and write it into an email course. And we break it down into steps over the 5 weeks. Also got a paid course about writing stories for social media posts, which is currently a mini course. It's probably a course that we're going to revisit a bit later in the year in light of ChatGPT and some recent developments. In the community then, so over that 5 months, so after the initial research call and identifying the different stories, there's an ongoing support process. So for the people in the community, we do fortnightly support calls. The guys and girls are welcome to post work whenever they have work for feedback. And depending on how urgent it is, I will leave a comment in the forum, or we will go kind of work through on the fortnightly support calls. So I'm just putting this out here and now. If that sounds interesting, I'm doing a 25% discount in June, or for the first 4. I'm announcing it here. So if you're on the webinar live, then you've kind of got first dibs on that, and it's obviously fine if not as well. But just send me if that's of interest, just send me a quick email or message after the call. And the first step is just to have a quick call with me, just to check it's right for you. Just before we go to discussion, the next webinar topic is going to be in 4 weeks' time, and it's going to be Friday the 14th of July. Next month theme, so next month's story is going to be location. So I'm going to bore you to tears about Sheffield and the Wirral and places that I grew up, and I'm still working through the content in my head for that. I actually spent quite a bit of time in South America after I graduated from uni, so I might talk about that some more as well. So we'll talk about locations that have shaped your perspective and who you are. So that is my session. I'm just going to stop the recording. Tell you what, I'm going to pause.